Evening, everyone. It's June 12th, 2024, and this is a public meeting of the Portland Committee on Community Engaged Policing, Community Engagement Subcommittee. And I will pass it over to co-chair of this subcommittee, Odelia, to get us started.
Awesome. Thanks, Dory. Hi, everyone. My name is Odelia Zuckerman, and I use she, her pronouns, and I am the co-chair of the Community Engagement Subcommittee. And I will pass it along to Carrie to introduce themselves.
Hello, my name is Carrie Driver. I use she, her pronouns, and I am a PCCEP member and a member of this subcommittee. I see Kip's online.
I am. Kip Silverman, I use he, him pronouns. PCCEP member, co-chair of the Settlement and Policy Subcommittee. Looking forward to the conversation. I am looking across. Do we have other PCCEP folks?
Yeah, I see Adam is next on my screen.
Oh, right. Yeah, okay. I've got to memorize everyone's name. My apologies. Adam, please introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Adam Gregg. I use he, him pronouns, and I am a new PCCEP member. I don't know who else to pass it to.
Yeah, I think I also see Ashley and Devonte so far. Devonte, why don't you go for it?
Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Devonte Manyweather. I am a PCCEP member, not involved with any subcommittees at this time, but to come soon. So.
Hey everyone. Thanks, Devonte. Yep, Ashley Schofield. I use she, her pronouns. I'm currently the co-chair for the full PCCEP, PCCEP committee. And good to see everybody tonight. Thank you. Anybody else? Any other members?
I think that's all the members online so far. And so now we can have any city staff, PPB folks, DOJ, anybody else here, just jump in and introduce themselves. And community members, feel free to introduce themselves in the chat. I'm Dory Grubinski, PCCEP project manager.
I'll jump in. Hi, everybody. Stephanie Howard. I work in the mayor's office. Glad to be here.
Evening, folks. I'm Mary Claire Buckley, and I work at the Portland Police Bureau.
Evening, everyone. Natasha Hamsberger, Portland Police Officer, Community Engagement. I'm happy to be here.
Try that again. Samir Kanal, I am the Advisory Boards and Commissions Manager for the Community Safety Division and the Public Safety Service Area. Thanks.
All right, and I think we can move on. And I'll pass it back to Odelia.
Okay, so our community agreements, as always, are listen actively and respectfully, share airtime, be present and open to new information and perspectives, assume positive intent, respect each other, respect the group, speak your own truth, communicate directly, honestly, and respectfully, ask questions to clarify, call out bias, and be okay with ambiguity. And so just to give a brief overview of tonight's meeting, we're going to do updates right after this, and then we're going to have a conversation kind of continuing the one from last week about crowd control, and then diving into more specifics about the protests at PSU, and then the general conversation of like the culture of policing and protest and how those kind of fit together. And then once we wrap that up, we're gonna check in about the codification and the recommendation and like process and where we're at for that. And then we'll have open public comment for the last 10 minutes about anything and everything else folks want to talk about.
Okay, I'm gonna quickly run through some updates here. So just keeping everyone informed that we have our new member orientation scheduled, some info about that. And as always, we'll be bringing the amici into that conversation too, but we'll have follow-up with the amici for a more extended version of that training in the future, as always. And next slide. Yep, and just reminding everyone again about our big community engagement event this month. That is on Wednesday, June 26th, in person only, at the Melody Event Center. This is actually in the same space that we had the PSR Town Hall, for those of you who attended that event. And background on why the event is in person only. That is an indirect response to meeting the needs of the communities that helped plan the event, and that the event is sort of the issues that it's sort of speaking to provide a more accessible space for people who experience brain injuries or similar processing disabilities. Yeah. Next slide, please. Oh, and I guess that's all our updates. I saw a question in the chat about the member training and asking if it is open to the public. It is not. Some of our subsequent trainings in the future, like the Miki one that I referenced, those are open to the public, but our initial orientation is for members only. Any other questions about updates? I know I kind of just breezed through those. Okay, cool. So now I'm going to pass it back over to Odelia for the main portion of the meeting.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, so we're just gonna get right into it and give a little debrief of last week's meeting. So we specifically talked about the new rapid response team. Well, I'll just read it and then maybe I'll talk. Anyways, okay, so the rapid response team was a unit of about 50 officers who focused on crowd control and protest response. The team has been on hiatus since June of 2021. In March of 2024, City Council unanimously approved the creation of a replacement unit called the Public Order Team. And just some background, the rapid response team faced substantial public criticism due to their response to protests in the summer of 2020. And members of the rapid response team also expressed discontent about the way their work environment was impacted by the degree of public scrutiny and criticism they received. And then in June of 2021, Officer Corey Budworth was indicted on one count of 4th-degree assault, a misdemeanor which was alleged to have occurred in August of 2020. One day later, all other members of the rapid response team, approximately 50 in total, resigned from the team, still remaining as officers, effectively disbanding the team. And then in July of 2023, charges against Officer Budworth were dropped after he publicly apologized to Terry Jacobs, the photographer he allegedly assaulted, as part of a restorative justice process. And so I think before we dive into, I don't know, like talking about the PSU protests, more specifically, if anyone who was at last week's meeting wants to share like any thoughts or feelings or questions they might have that still remain about the rapid response team, or things like they didn't feel were answered yet or that they would like clarity on, would love to hear your thoughts.
Go ahead, Kip.
Yeah, during last week's meeting, we did have some back and forth about things are still in motion, dates are not quite set, plans on introducing the team and potentially team members. There are a lot of pieces that are still kind of up in the air. So I did request that we bring PPB back to talk about these things as they come available, plus other questions that come up and any discussion or recommendation that we have from today's meeting. So I do feel I appreciate Chief Day being here and the city counterparts. I feel like we didn't get a lot of details, and I think we really need to get into a deeper level of information and exchange. We talk a lot about 2020, but I would argue that there were incidents and problematic things from 2019, 2017, 2016, 2011. There's a longer history here than just 2020. So I really do want to make sure that we have the opportunity to understand what the plans are and engage the community and get feedback, and also have ample time to put in recommendations before whatever potential unrest is currently being planned for.
Kip, quick follow-up question. When you say, like, can you say a little more about the specifics that you are hoping to learn more about? To kind of, yeah, put a finer point on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that the state changed some engagement policies, but I haven't seen substantial change in the current police directives around protests and response, especially around use of force and dispersal. There were many aspects that were, as I understand the current directives, that were not actually followed. There's an opportunity here to do a lot better in explaining what the engagement, decision making, and reporting is going to be. We have knowledge that the body cameras will be in play in September, but there's also not, we don't necessarily understand how that may come into play when there are multiple officers responding to an event and there are multiple videos, and I think things get very complicated. So just understanding what the new team is, the code of conduct, and if it's changing any further from what I'm currently looking at the website right now. I guess there's one thing that I would like to ask when we get to that point is there's something I asked about 13 years ago, there's a lot of discussion in the directives and when force can be used. There's not a lot of guidance around when to stop using force or backing off. And I feel like those are things that, given the history that we've seen, need to be addressed as well.
Great, thanks, Kip. So I'm unmuted. Okay. And Leslie, I saw your hand too, so I'm gonna circle back to you too.
I think it was, I think I also, it was very similar to what Kip said, but he laid it out, I think, a lot better. And it was just, I was confused about where we were left with, it didn't seem like there was a lot of answers yet, to a lot of the questions that we and the community had. And so, yeah, that was my question, like next steps, follow-ups, like what have they committed to, come back and kind of give us more visibility into the development. So yeah, that was pretty much it.
Okay, great. Odelia?
Yeah, just to build off of that, I think it would be great to like hear a bit of a deeper dive into some of the questions that were asked. And I also think, like, just to recap for folks who weren't there, a lot of community members spoke about wanting more transparency. So whether that be like seeing the training slides given the past and how that's maybe been harmful. And then also some folks wanted to know who was going to be on the team and like more about that process. My mind is blanking, but yeah, that's what I'll say for now.
Okay, yeah, so what I'm hearing is, just wanting more detail about the rollout and some of sort of that one framing question, like the what will be different and how will it be, will the new team be accountable to those changes sort of questions. Just wanting more information, more detail about those specific things. Am I getting that right? Okay, cool. Okay, great. I think that is a good primer for the discussion that is set up for tonight. And maybe a good time to sort of move into that, unless there were any other thoughts or even responses from city or PPB folks here from any of those comments before we move on, or to any of those comments. Oh, Devante?
Yeah, so I feel like, there was a lot of, I don't want to say emotion, but it kind of felt like it was a lot of emotion. So I felt like Chief Day was doing his best to kind of field some of that. I feel like what would have helped, kind of what was being mentioned previously by Kip, is, if there, with the transparency piece, if there was more actual data that could be given to us to actually be able to gauge or have a metric of what is being done differently, as opposed to, and I'm sure that there is legitimate efforts being made, but to kind of ease some of the unrest, to have that quantifiable data, I think would have been extremely helpful, and we just simply didn't have that. In the same breath, Chief Day doesn't, there's no way he would know in advance exactly which questions would be asked. So I think that we have to, keep that in mind and have some level of grace for that aspect. But even, he did mention that there were previous members of the rapid response team that had applied again for the new reinstated team that were denied because of the vetting process that they had. So even something as far as, how many such cases were there, something like that would have been extremely beneficial. I think would help to, ease some of the unrest people have about the team being reformed. So just quantifiable data, I think. And, I think if we are transparent after having these meetings with maybe providing, the chief with some of the questions that are being asked, at least the ones that are kind of more concise that they can actually provide data for, then maybe the next time that he comes, he can be, prepared to give some of that to us. So I think that, while we didn't get all the information we wanted, I think that, well, I'm new. I'm a new PCEP member. So, but I would assume that maybe we, on all sides didn't do everything that we could have to make sure that that information, that he knew to provide that information. I'm just trying to, consider all sides to, try to strive towards a productive and beneficial progression of the discussion. So, but that would just kind of be my thought.
Yeah, that's great input. I think that's a really great next step and actionable thing that the committee could do. Plan to re-engage in that way. Thanks, Devontae. Leslie?
This may be too early, but in terms of like, that continued engagement and transparency, I'm sure that that specific team is going to have a lot of scrutiny, and they might produce reports as part of their annual process, similar to I think it would be good if they are going to produce reports, that we make a conscious effort as part of PCEP to review those reports and kind of bring people and ask about it and things like that, similar to how we do the stops data. And if they're not, then maybe the recommendation is to ask them or make a recommendation to create those types of reports so that we can keep that transparency, that accountability. So those are just a couple of ideas that I, as folks were talking, came.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Leslie. I'm glad your hand is up, Stephanie, because I saw your links in the chat, and I had a question about if the Independent Monitor LLC stuff came up in the last meeting, and if you could speak a little more about that, and if that's a good place to look for some of these questions.
I think, yeah, thanks, Dory. It did come up in the last meeting, and the reason I think it's important, and I posted it again here just for convenience, is because I think those documents between the report, the responses, there's a training assessment that was done. There are several documents there that really kind of outline some of the procedures and some of the language that I think can help the group hone in on more specific questions or recommendations. So I'm going to keep putting them there just so that they're easy for you to find. But to me, it's a really nice kind of landing spot if what you're looking for is kind of an in-depth overview that you can dig in on a little bit to understand just the 2020 protest response and what the next steps are for in terms of recommendation by IMLLC. I really appreciate it. I think the important thing here is that I think last week was the beginning of a conversation that is going to continue. And I feel, really strongly that that's a good thing for everyone. And I think the chief feels really strongly about that as well. And we want to continue to engage. So I think that's all very welcome. I think some of the things to also just know is that there are some of the answers we just didn't have at that moment, right? Some of them we just didn't know the answers to. So I think follow-up will be just fine. I know Heidi Brown offered to do some follow-up on things. We're working on getting some answers to other things as well. So I guess mostly I just want to say I think this is just part of an ongoing conversation. There's not going to be one meeting where every aspect can be analyzed or answered or anything. So I appreciate everybody treating this as, a topic that's going to continue to be discussed, and we're going to, figure out along the way how to best communicate information, how to make sure that the community knows what's going into this work and this unit. So, again, it's only just been reassembled. So some of the steps are not done yet. And so for the steps that aren't done yet, there may be answers a little bit, down the road than just in one quick meeting. But I appreciate the discussion. I'm happy to continue to do anything I can to make sure that we're getting information to you all.
Great. Thanks, Stephanie. Ashley?
And
Oh, go ahead, Mary Claire.
sorry, I wanted to also back up what Stephanie was just saying. The chief, I think, made it clear at that meeting that he would be willing to engage further. I appreciate some of these comments, Devontae, when you talk about it would be helpful to have data brought to these meetings, at the time and even to this day, the RRT has yet to be reconstituted. They haven't even acted yet. They've been identified. They've gone to the first training. We have the second mandatory training piece on this Friday, and then they have a couple more trainings for different specialties on the group. So there's no data to share with you yet, but we certainly will have that. They will be required as all officers are, that if they use force in the course of their work on the team, they will be, filling in force reports, which my office in the, Inspector General's office has the force inspector and the force analyst, and they will be reviewing, analyzing them, and we will be, creating reports about that. And then, all along as this progresses, if you have questions or, and as somebody said, it would be, I think, helpful to give us any particular questions in advance so we can come prepared to do that. But I know that the, Bureau will be more than willing to, share the information as we go forward and as this, unit takes its place. Obviously our hope and prayer is that we never see another 2020. And frankly, we haven't in the last few years. The crowd control, has not been as big an issue in, since 2020, although we anticipate that, that might be, as a result of the elections this year and want to be prepared for that. But there's a lot to share with you. The Bureau has spent a lot of time, not just recently, but, it's been a couple of years that they've been working on, planning for this, constitution of the group. They are planning to use new tactics, different approaches to work with the crowd, such as the, liaison officers who will be going out and talking to, folks who are organizing these protests to see, how we can work together, and so to give people the right that they have to express themselves under the First Amendment and stuff like that. So I think you'll see, as you invite the Bureau members back, you can hear all about those changes and improvements we think have been made that will make this, a better working unit for the city.
Thanks for that, Stephanie and Mary Claire. I think it's definitely helpful to have a better understanding that this is still very much in development. There are a lot of decisions that are yet to be made, and I think that's actually really encouraging for PCCEP. This is obviously an issue that has substantial community interest, and all the better for PCCEP to be involved from a very early stage. I think that increases your opportunity to make an impact and be heard in this on this issue. Ashley?
Thanks, Dory. Yeah, I just had a couple comments, and then I'm imagining we're gonna start leaning into like the recommendation and talking about what that could look like. First thing I want to say is I imagine that a protest like 2020 will probably happen again. I think when we think about protests and our First Amendment rights, it's bigger than what PPB and the city could ever sort of like contain. Like, we're at a, we're deeply into like a revolution in our society about oppression and colonialism. And so I think I'm just, I want to make sure that we're like that something like this is probably going to happen again. And I don't think it's something the city can sort of like contain. And so leaning into like, I wasn't available to join the meeting last week. I had a work event, but I did watch the video, the recording. I was only able to get to about 3/4 of it. And I'm really excited to hear how the city and PPB are going to be really engaging on this, and that this is like one of many conversations. It's really hopeful to hear. And I had a question for Stephanie and maybe the city in regards to the recommendation from the Independent Monitor LLC. My understanding was they're like after a year they were supposed to have another report to detail the implementation of their recommendations over the last year, and so curious where that's been has landed or will be landing.
Yes. So a year from that will be in August. We did submit a 6-month report, which is in the link that I shared on what has been implemented so far. So yeah, that's all. I think the independent monitor team is coming back to town here in the next couple of weeks, I think, and working to, follow up. Mary Claire will know the days.
Oh,
go ahead, Mary Claire.
Okay, no, I said, yeah, I have the date. It's a timely question. The IMLLC is coming back on Monday and Tuesday to do 2 days full of interviews to gather information as to how the Bureau and city have, what progress we've made towards implementing the 12 recommendations that they made. And then once they're done, they'll go back and, finish their research. They asked, provided us a pretty comprehensive document request. So they'll be reviewing all the information that we provide them at their request. And then they will issue a final report that's due August 8th. So you'll be able to see that when that comes out as well.
And I do also just want to say we also have the new independent monitor, which will be taking over, and this is this is all also part of the settlement agreement. So I think there will be ongoing updates as this as this work continues and as events happen, and we are making sure that the systems that are in place are doing what they're intended to do. So I think that's all part of the process that's being envisioned between both the IMLLC group and the independent monitor with Mark Smith and his team. And I saw Antoinette's with us tonight as well. So shout out to her.
And Ashley, if I can say one other thing, I didn't mean to insinuate that there would not be protests going forward. All I meant is we were hopeful that they would never take the same. I mean, for all of you, you should be aware that no other city in this country had the protests for the length that the city of Portland did. So that's what more I was referring to, is ours went for 6 months. There were, even Minneapolis, where the incident occurred, didn't last anywhere near that long. And so, our goal is that, hopefully we'd never see one of that duration. We certainly know that there will be, protests, and Portland has always been a city that welcomes that. And so I didn't mean to say that we're hoping there aren't any. I just meant to the extent that they occurred in 2020, or to the length that they did, because it took a toll on everybody in the city, clearly. So
no, thank you. That makes sense. Yep. No,
thank you.
And then just to wrap up my time here, I guess leaning into what kind of recommendation is, sounds like, PCCEP, we have a lot to learn. We have a lot to keep engaging in. And so I just wanted to plug in, we had talked about this a couple months ago, and it come as an agenda suggestion from a community member around the incident that happened 2 years ago, when we had people who were protesting and they were confronted by a white supremacist and murdered, and the big investigation around what happened and what PPB had been doing during that incident. We had agreed as a committee to sort of move forward with that agenda item. And so I think those kind of instances where I think what my understanding from the public, the person who had submitted the agenda idea was it's this, if we're moving forward with trusting that PPB can be the crowd, as Chief Day had said in the meeting last week, that the goal is to make sure First Amendment rights are protected, and that, you know, reaching out to community members to try to make sure that that's available. I think it's kind of one of those things, like we hear what you say, but then we see what you do. And so I think these incidences need to be addressed. And they, you know, I think they need to, and I think they just need to be part of this bigger conversation around giving this really important role back to PBB and what that feels like for the community. So I have some ideas around that, and I can talk about it later, and maybe talk about it with the committee first before bringing it to the public. But and then also just that Truth and Healing Commission sort of that was also something PCEP had pushed a couple years ago, but has kind of laid dormant, it feels like. So there's those pieces that we could maybe bring together in this conversation as we work towards thinking about what kind of recommendation PCEP could do here. So thank you.
Great. Okay, great conversation, everybody. Really helpful debrief, I think. Oh, Odelia.
No, I was gonna see it if we could transition so you keep going.
Yeah. So I think now's a good time to transition into sort of the continuation of this discussion. So we'll get those slides back up, and I'll hand that to Odelia.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, so while we know that the current or the new rapid response team is not like anything right now or responding to protests because they're still training, we still want to make sure we're talking about like current crowd control tactics and policing at protests that have been happening over the past few months. And I think like one site of a lot of this is PSU and the protests that have been around divestment and like the Free Palestine movement, right? So just to give some context, 2 PSU students have filed a lawsuit claiming city and university police used physical force against nonviolent students. And I have a little more context on this that I can share. This was on May 23rd. And it was the day that 2 students chained themselves to the front, like to building doors, and then were arrested. And then 2 more folks also chained themselves to the doors later, but folks came out to support and were running and ran behind towards the parking lot of this building, which is where these incidents occurred. And they were just like chaining arms from the reports that I've read, and thought they were arrested and or they experienced force, right? And they were not given any verbal warning prior to this force, nor were any alternatives to force considered. So in these reports, given to both President Ancud and to Ted Wheeler, there were citations of pain, mental suffering, emotional distress, humiliation, and medical bills that have kind of are the reason behind this. And then other protesters have also reported negative interactions with PPB while participating in PSU demonstrations. And so kind of want to leave that open for everyone to discuss. I'm really excited or is there another slide here on this? Okay. So folks just want to share things that they've seen or experienced at the protests. And first I wanted to hand it off to Alyssa Azar, if you want to introduce yourself at all and talk about things that you've seen at the protests.
Hi, yeah. My name is Alyssa Azar. I'm a journalist and a community member in Portland, and I was on the ground at PSU quite a bit. I'm going to talk about a few separate days, and I just want to note that I was on the ground for everything I'm about to mention. I saw everything that I'm about to mention myself, and I would say about 99% of it is on video. Um, Also, before I get into that, I do think it's worth noting something new that we've been seeing by PPB is that kind of the second that protests begin, PPB already has a presence. Lately, it's been bike cops, and they've just been doing this new thing where they've been babysitting the crowd, intimidating protesters, on a handful of occasions, even calling certain students out by name, which, I was told by folks that that happened too, that they felt like that was a method of intimidation, and yeah, they just felt uncomfortable with that. But yeah, so the first police response, where things got physical and it led to arrests at the protests on campus at PSU was on May 2nd. And on that day, PPB went into the library that the protesters had been occupying. And after the building was cleared, there was a pretty long day that followed with standoffs with the cops. I'm pretty sure that it was only OSP that deployed less lethals that day, but PPB was still quite brutal with their response, and they were pretty heavy-handed with their use of mace. At one point, there had been a fairly long standoff with PPB after OSP had left, and protesters had been standing right in front of the police line, and they were just standing there and chanting for, I think it was hours at that point. And on multiple occasions, PPB rushed the group and began pushing people, and the entire thing was unprovoked. I saw many people get hit with batons, people being pushed to the ground, maced, and I saw PPB officer Daniel Hall punch a Black student in the face 4 times repeatedly. And right before this happened, right before he punched that student, he sexually assaulted another student by reaching under her jacket to push her to the ground by her breasts. And she actually later sent me photos with scratches and bruises all around her areola and on her nipples. And later that evening, there were more arrests that were pretty brutal, that happened for people that were just standing in a park. Some of the arrestees were screaming in pain. At least one was doused in mace after already being in handcuffs. Journalists were arrested that day, and there were a handful of bystanders that were also arrested that day that weren't even involved in the protests. And then, as you already mentioned earlier, May 22nd was the first day that 2 students chained themselves to the admin building. And one of the students that was arrested was a Muslim, and she had her hijab ripped off after it was explained to police that she was wearing it for religious purposes. And the very following day, on May 23rd, another 2 people chained themselves to a building. Their arrests were also very brutal, including one of them who had been thrown to the ground and had at least 4 cops on her. And shortly after these arrests, the group of protesters had moved over to the parking lot at the admin building. And 2 more arrests were made to people who were sitting on the ground in an attempt to block the police vehicles that had the arrestees in them. And at that point, the group of protesters were standing in front of the entrance, and without any kind of warning, there was absolutely zero dispersal order given. The police rushed the group and immediately began shoving people to the ground and into cement walls. I actually remember being terrified that day that somebody would be severely hurt or worse, either by being trampled or by hitting their heads on concrete. It was actually so bad that even the cops were falling over the groups of people that they had pushed down to the ground. And yeah, there was a lot of aggression that day. I've been covering stuff like this for over 4 years, and this is one of the most brutal days that I've seen in a long time. Again, on this day, there were countless femmes that were groped or pushed by having cops reach directly for their breasts. One student had their nose broken, another had 2 ribs broken. One student is about to undergo surgery for a torn ACL due to police violence. And then a few days later, on May 27th, a group showed up to protest after hearing horrifying news that came out of Rafah. People gathered at the park right in front of the Justice Center downtown. And I got there maybe like 10 minutes max after the start time. And by the time I got there, there was already a police presence and people had already been arrested for jaywalking. And this happened to 3 different people. One was eventually let go with a citation. And then later in the night, another arrest happened to someone who was literally just standing on the sidewalk. It was very confusing when the cops rushed in for them. They hadn't done anything. And the rest of the night, the cops just kind of proceeded to babysit the group. Everywhere they walked, they would just follow. So that, in addition to the unnecessary arrests for jaywalking, honestly, it seemed like nothing less than an excuse to gather information about individuals involved in protests and identify them. And I just want to add, I think it bears noting that on May 22nd, 23rd, and the day that I just mentioned when people were arrested for jaywalking, there was absolutely no property destruction, no violence from protesters. There was not so much as a sticker put up anywhere. And I think these events perfectly demonstrated the fallacy of the repeated rhetoric that nonviolent actions lead to less violence perpetuated by the police. It's also worth mentioning that multiple people brought up being sexually assaulted to the police during standoffs or confrontations with PPB, and in turn, they were met by the police either laughing in their faces or the cops calling them liars. I think that's pretty much everything that I have to share right now.
Thank you so much for sharing all of that. I really appreciate you, and yeah, thank you again. And I think like at our meeting last week, I asked Chief Day about a statement he made in a press conference on May 8th, and it was in response to the May Day protests. And I wrote it, don't mess it up. It was essentially talking about taking people into custody to use that as a tool to leverage information. And I asked if that's alluding to like arresting people for sorry, one second. Sorry. If that was like potentially alluding to arresting people as we saw these jaywalking charges. And he said no, that's not what it was. And then Jared from the DOJ asked a question, or kind of was like sparking a conversation about what it means when, like, how police respond to different protests with different ideologies, and kind of thinking about that more. And maybe like it sounds like from what Alyssa's saying that folks experience some pretty brutal things for just practicing their First Amendment rights. So I'll stop talking. But yeah.
It's like we have another hand. And this time I think it's open to other folks who wanted to share any experiences about the PSU protests or any sort of similar experiences. So it looks like Sav has a comment.
Hi, yes, I do. I'm hearing, we're open for testimony at this point?
Yeah, go for it.
I'm happy to testify on behalf of my own personal experience and the personal experience that I had on 2 separate occasions, specifically with Officer Daniel Hall. I'm also happy to talk about my experience with Officer Christina Serrano. The first experience I had was on the day that PPB ushered 70 riot cops onto Portland State campus, in which Officer Daniel Hall, during a riot line, put the entirety of his body weight onto my throat. I told him multiple times that I wasn't able to breathe and that he needed to remove his hand off of my throat, and he laughed in my face. When that didn't work, he tried lifting me off the ground via my throat. Again, I have photographs of the bruises left on my collarbone and throat from his elbow, of him repeatedly pushing his forearm into my throat. When that didn't work, he then moved down and started groping my breasts and lifted me off the ground with my right breast. I have bruises on both my right breast and under my left breast from where he groped me. After the cops moved back, I confronted him about it, and he started yelling in my face and telling me that he didn't know what I was talking about, and that I was making things up. I also watched cops go after a trans woman, and I witnessed 3 police officers winding up their arms before punching her in the face and on the body and pinning her to the ground to make arrests. The second instance occurred during the riot line that occurred at the opening of the garage door outside of the administration building, where again, I had the chief of Portland Police for PSU. So this is the officer that ended up having a heart attack because brutalizing students was apparently too much for his heart to take. He used his forearm on my throat again and used his full body weight on my throat and lifted me off the ground because he was putting so much body weight onto me that he lifted me off the ground. Officer John Oliphant fell directly on top of me during the riot, and I have bruises on both of my knees from that happening. Outside of the experiences that I've had with these 2 male officers, who I am completely disgusted by, I would like to bring to the attention, I heard that there's some cops in this meeting, and I would like to open up a brief discussion about anonymity and respect for protesters about Officer Christina Serrano. She's threatened me multiple times, calling me by my first name and attempting to reduce my anonymity to absolute 0 in front of other officers and protesters. She had to be removed from a conversation with me by Officer Zucker because she kept getting in my face and threatening me and laughing at me. She knows the entirety of my full legal name and has made it very apparent that she wants to do everything in her power to dox me and make sure that I feel as unsafe as physically possible during protests. She's also responsible for smashing the glasses of a student during a riot line. She also made comments about touching the vaginas of college-age girls. She also thinks it's okay to call college-age girls faggots because apparently her brother is gay and that makes it okay. Frankly, I'm disgusted. I have little to no, I have very low expectations for the Portland Police Bureau at this point. Seeing their behavior and the treatment of my peers by Portland police, I watched them tear my friend's ACL to shreds. I have low expectations, but they've been brought even lower. I watched Officer John Oliphant shove a 7-year-old boy so hard that he flew in the air and had to receive medical aid from one of our medics. This is a officer who is known worldwide for his brutality against protesters. There was a 7-year-old boy, and somehow he thought it was appropriate to shove him so hard that he had to receive medical treatment. There are not a lot of things that will bring me to a state of visible emotion at this point, but that did it for me. That's all I have to say at this point. But to anyone in this meeting who is still a cop and is still bearing the badge for Portland Police, you have my utmost disrespect. And I'm incredibly disappointed in what you've decided to do with your life, because clearly brutalizing college students to you is your idea of protecting and serving, and it's disgusting. That's all I have to say at this time.
Thank you. Oh, thank you for sharing that. I'm really sorry that you experienced all of that harm. That's horrible. I know sorries don't really do anything, but I really appreciate you being here and sharing that with us, especially in a space like this where there's lots of people who are connected to those systems, right? So thank you for that. And I think like, yeah, there's so many different things to talk about. And I think like you spoke about shoving a 7-year-old boy, right? And even like PSU students in general and student protests, like that's often who makes up protests, the students and young people, right? And the specific ways in which policing has a distinctive impact on youth and on younger people, right? Who maybe not like the 7-year-old is going to know their rights and that's going to change anything. But things like having that kind of knowledge about things and then like adultism, right? And having older people use fear tactics and all these different things. Anyways, do you still have your hand up, Sav? Was there something else you wanted to say?
I didn't. I'm gonna lower my hand.
Okay.
Yeah, but I think it's very important to start having that discussion, especially while PPB is advertising ride-alongs for kids with officers. You know, they're advertising ride-alongs, and on the ground we have John Oliphant just going absolutely ham on a 7-year-old boy and thinking that it's funny. I'd also want to mention before I leave that this boy has friends who are in Gussa, and the reason he was at this protest, for anyone questioning why anyone would bring a 7-year-old boy to a protest, is because he has watched his friends die on the ground. I cannot imagine as a mother telling your 7-year-old son that you can't play with your friends anymore because they've been brutalized by the Israeli military. So he was there because, in his own words, that was his way of speaking up for his friends. And being met with police violence at 7 years old is incredibly indicative of a larger problem within the PPB, of their lack of empathy, their lack of respect for human life, and basic emotional cognition that it appears that they are to be lacking. I don't know what training goes on in that precinct, but I mean, at this point, it's just hopeless. That's all I have to say at this point.
Thank you, Sav. Looks like we have Devante.
Yeah, so I mean, first and foremost, I do want to, say that I'm incredibly sorry to anyone who was there and did have, an experience of brutalization, or just any kind of negatively impactful experience. That, my heart goes out. And, I don't feel like anyone should ever have to leave feeling like they experienced something like that. For the sake of trying to reframe, some of that emotion into being an integral part of a possible resolution or recommendation, because, as the people who were there, who are experiencing these things, I would think that some of you have maybe the best vantage point to put forth a recommendation of how, in the future, police, Portland police could do better at interacting with protesters at some of these events when they are happening. Do you have any recommendations about what might make the situation better or less volatile, to lessen some of the hostilities. I know that it was also mentioned that it feels like they are loitering around to, apply some sort of pressure on protesters. I definitely want to validate that feeling. As someone who was not there, I could never imagine or speak to that. But I also, just looking at some of the information that's out there in the reports, know that, Miller Library has suffered significant damage, and that does impact other students, students who were there and students who aren't there. Knowing that there is real damage happening, and that, protesters do also feel unsafe, and that, officers may or may not feel unsafe as well. What can we do to make this a healthier situation so that people can protest and exercise their First Amendment rights, while also ensuring that everyone in the environment, both protesters, students, children who may or may not be there, and also law enforcement staff, that everyone involved feels safe?
Devonte, I think you are anticipating exactly the right questions and actually exactly where we had in mind for this meeting to sort of resolve in is that kind of conversation, expanding that back up to the committee in just a few minutes once we collect all the comments. But I love that you're bringing that up, because I think that's often where PCCEP as a group is really at its best, is kind of collecting all these different kinds of information. So, last week you started out with, grounding this conversation a little bit more with like the institutional dialogue around crowd response or crowd control. And then now hearing some more of the community testimony, and then, bringing it around to a place where it's like, okay, well, what is the action here? What needs to be improved on? What can be done? What's the direction? So I love that you're bringing that up, and that's exactly where I think we're trying to go, bringing in, all of the different types of information that we're hearing, in sort of these from these different kinds of sources, and synthesizing that all together. So I'm gonna put a pin in your question, if that's okay, and we're gonna circle back around to it in just a few minutes. But yeah, thank you so much for raising that. Dan, let's go to you.
So, hi, good evening, everybody. This is Dan Handelman. I use he, him pronouns. I'm with the group Portland Cop Watch. I just want to briefly repeat for the people who weren't here last week the story about Mayor Wheeler at City Council, where a person who had been at a protest at PSU was corralled by the police into an alleyway. They said that a person with a car who they thought was a right-wing person opposed to the message they were carrying tried to drive into the crowd, and the crowd blocked the car from hitting the protesters or the police. And instead of the mayor saying, well, I'm glad that nobody got hurt, he said, you had been told to leave for almost an hour, and if you decide not to leave when you're told to leave, then you shouldn't whine, cry, and complain about what happens. I asked the chief if that was a policy of the Portland Police Bureau, since that's the police commissioner that said that, and he said he wasn't familiar with it. So I pasted a link in the chat about, I'll find it again too for you, about those comments. Okay, so second of all, somebody shared with me a video that was very telling about, that had the, it has the, are you still there? I can't see you anymore.
We can hear
it has,
We can
you
hear
see
you.
Okay, it has the video. Oh yeah, my Zoom just quit unexpectedly. Okay, so I'm glad you can hear me. It has the video of some people running down the sidewalk at PSU carrying half-cut rubber garbage cans, as quote unquote shields, but they're rubber, and it's intercut with the police spokesperson talking to the news media and saying these people came at the police with hardened shields. They were rubber garbage cans, and they said, and they ran right at the police with them. And you can see in the video that the police are the ones who run at those people and knock them down. So I just think that there should be also discussion about how the story is spun, and how the police, it's horrible to hear them laughing in people's faces and denying what just happened, but then even the high-ranking officers, like the public information officer, making up their own version of what happened when you can see what actually happened, is something for you to think about. Okay, I also want to add to this, though. I saw somebody at a protest that I was at on Saturday that was not at PSU, and it wasn't directly involved, it had anything to do with the war in Gaza. It was at the Rose Festival, and there was somebody that got excluded from the park initially by the police. One officer started talking to this person, and eventually 10 officers showed up for one person, several on bike. Some of them had come over from a protest at the beginning of the Rose Parade, where people had lain down in front of the crowd, in front of the parade, and they were the only officers who did not have name tags on. They claimed that it's a bureau policy when they go to a protest that they don't have to wear their name tags anymore. That, my understanding was, that was something temporary that Chief Jamie Resch 2 chiefs ago put in place in 2020. And if it's an ongoing policy, I think that's very troubling, because you can't file complaints against cops when you can't identify them. So the fact that they were just still wearing numbers and not names, and that so many of them showed up for one person, and all they did was cite that person for with a cite in lieu of arrest, and then they let them go back in the park. So it was kind of ridiculous. So I just thought I'd share that with you all too. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. Alyssa?
Yeah, I also wanted to just bring up that second day where people blocked the admin building, and the PSU chief, I don't know if it's been confirmed that it was a heart attack, but when they suffered injuries and the ambulance came in, there was a bunch of disinformation going around from a bunch of different sources, but including the PPB chief, stating that it was protesters who blocked the ambulance. And I wanted to bring that up again because I think it's just more evidence of how PPB has been condemning protesters and painting them in a bad light, when not only was that objectively false, but it was the PPB vehicles that showed up to the admin building that actually blocked the street and made it so the ambulance had to reverse and turn around. And it was physically impossible for protesters to block the ambulance that day. And this is also something else that is backed up with documentation. There's video and photo evidence throughout the entire duration of the incident. So I just wanted to add that in there too.
Thanks, Alyssa. And as I put in the chat, Kip is the last comment we have time for here, and then we're going to transition to the recommendation discussion, which of course we still will hear public input on. That'll be kind of a brainstorming session, kind of in the same vein, but just pivoting the goal of the conversation slightly. Kip?
Yeah, I want to start with, I appreciate, Alyssa, your comments and testimony, and Sav, yours, and I'm sorry you went through that. Over the years, I've been active in many protests, and I have personal experiences, friends of mine, and personally, where I've seen similar behavior over the years. So I would like to I'm sorry, I've had it in my head and I kind of lost it. I've seen similar behaviors. I had to escort a friend of mine to the Portland Police building. Actually, I think it was the federal building, to try to get a card from an officer when she had said that she was brutalized by him, and had to get a commanding officer to force the other officer to hand a card over. This is a decade plus ago. But my biggest concern is that I see a lot of repeating behavior, regardless of what is being stated in directives and statutes and promises. So I just wanted to say the videos that I watched from PSU and that have been shared with me do not follow the news reports and statements from public officials. And this is one of the reasons why the Settlement and Policy Committee wanted to bring this forward, is to ensure that the civil rights and constitutional rights of everybody is protected and addressed equally. We're going to move into a recommendation conversation, which I'm looking forward to. But I implore our city and Portland police folks who are here to take these conversations very seriously. And Stephanie, I appreciate you suggesting filling out an IPR report. That can't be the only solution to a lot of these problems. So we really need for an equitable experience that protects individual civil rights and to fulfill the promise of constitutional policing, we need fundamental changes. And that's why I'm looking forward to this ongoing conversation.
Thank you, Kip. Okay, let's transition to the next chapter of this conversation. So, and yeah, so I think and again, I think Devonte queued this up well. So PCCEP often grounds recommendations in starting with the institutional knowledge, hearing community experiences. And of course, I think we're at the early stages of both of those things when it comes to the RRT team and the crowd control, but it's certainly an issue that PCCEP is very interested in and that you've heard a lot of community interest in. So Odelia wanted to put this on the agenda for tonight and talk about brainstorming around what a PCCEP recommendation kind of proactively around this subject could look like, especially in light of where this meeting began, kind of that conversation around the reformation of the RRT team, decisions that have yet to be made, that kind of thing. Odelia, anything to add on that before we get started?
No, that sounds good. Yeah, and I really like what you shared, and like when we do, I guess I am adding something, Dory. But when we do like brainstorm and think about things that can change, and we think about like the current directives that exist and how that shows up in policing and protest response and what we've heard today, like how can that not happen, right? And so it's like I don't know. We don't want to have protests that are nonviolent, like in which police start that violence, right? Like that's never kind of what one is looking for. And so, yeah, how can this be like a substantial actual change as opposed to like something like trainings where we see sometimes that doesn't always make a difference. Anyways, Kip, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, I think from the conversations we've heard earlier, and to your question, Odelia, I had given testimony to City Council, I believe it was back in 2012, that in my experiences with Occupy Portland protests, The only time I had ever seen violence begin was when it was initiated by the Portland Police, which I have not been to quite as many protests as I'm getting older. But the videos that I watched recently were really concerning. One thing that I think we can do as part of a recommendation, and this goes back to the training and transparency of training, is I shared the crowd or the public response directive link a little bit earlier. I'll have to find it again. But something, I've been an activist since I've been a teenager, essentially. I've been involved with different types of protests. One thing I do not see the Portland Police engaging with, and there's only 2 mentions in the directives for crowd engagement on dealing with people who are resisting passively, that even when protesters are not following directives like to disperse or move or leave, and it's not been declared a riot, although we talked last week about that being used an unlawful gathering or riot has been used. The Independent Monitor LLC had mentioned that as well, that I don't see a lot of directives or training here that talk about how to engage with passive resistors in a non-violent way. And I think that would be one of the things that needs to be addressed in greater clarity, and also be included in training if it's not already. And if it is, then again, we would love to see what the trainings are. But passive resistance basically means you're going to exercise your right to civil disobedience. And as long as you're not posing a threat, and by a threat meaning actively about to harm somebody, and generally people who are locked in arms or something like that are not an active threat, using force against them should be, I would argue, never. I know that legally force can be used to compel someone to comply, but given the state of the history of things, I think that should be addressed. There have been one occasion that I'm aware of where I was able to influence an outcome by telling a incident commander that if there were going to be protests in City Hall, that violence should not be used. And that incident commander, when there were passive protesters, those protesters were carried out. 2 months later, people were pushed down a flight of stairs. So it is possible, but I believe it requires explicit training. It should be built out into the directives. And I feel like the Portland Police their incident commanders should hold themselves and the officers to a much higher standard than they have. And I'll stop there. That's my first recommendation.
Stephanie?
No, I appreciate that. One thought that came to mind that I thought I would just raise for you all to talk about or consider is that the critical assessment and thereby the settlement agreement requires PPB to follow the trainings of the National Tactical Officers Association, right? The best practices by that national organization. And so I'm wondering if there's not, in order to develop, recommendations that are directly actionable and can really be informative in those situations if there's an opportunity here for members to, I don't know what kind of training information or things they have, but I'm wondering if that's not a good place to start with, trying to identify whether there are tactics that should be used that are consistent with best practices that maybe aren't, or vice versa. Just throwing that out there as a potential resource as you think about recommendations.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's that sounds like a helpful resource, and that's where I think PCEP is hoping to go in the direction of grounding the recommendation in sort of more concrete, specific things. Because you know, when PCEP hears community testimony, you know, some of the behaviors identified are concrete, specific examples. And so I think it would be really constructive for the committee to do some sort of review about best practices and then identify like, oh, okay, like, you know, we hear a lot of input where it sounds like maybe that's not consistently being observed. Maybe we could make a recommendation in that direction. Or, you know, we've reviewed the IMLLC report and, you know, we want to make sure that this gets observed in the formation of the new team, et cetera. So I think there actually are a lot of footholds where PCEP can ground, you know, the thinking around the recommendation and how they'd like to see this team be reformulated. That gives, you know, yeah, just a little color to some of the more abstract ideas being expressed.
And if I may just also just say, what I also don't want is I don't want PCEP to be put in a position where they're making recommendations that are inconsistent with DOJ requirements, right? I want that all to be aligned so that it, again, can be, you know, an actionable and something that can be a concrete result of a PCEP recommendation.
Absolutely. Odelia?
Yeah, Sav, your hand was up earlier and you put it down. Did you have something to say before I go?
I realized this wasn't like an invitation for like open testimony with that. So I'm sorry. That was just my bad misreading the situation.
Oh, all good. All good. Is this our okay. Sorry, I'm thinking now. I forgot everything I was gonna say. Yeah, I guess for me, I'm having trouble kind of thinking about what a recommendation might look like in practice and really how that's different than like the IMLLC and different directives when these things say like don't use force in this situation, don't do this, and we hear all of these things happening, right? And it's kind of hard to think about if something we would do would make a difference. It's something I'm struggling with. And then also like because of that, my mind kind of goes to accountability too, and kind of building that out and what that looks like. Because to me, it sounds like people on the ground are experiencing things that are very different than how it's perceived by like the police in the city and maybe who makes those kinds of decisions. And there just seems to be like a major disconnect between when harm does and doesn't happen. So that's just something I'm grappling with, and yeah, just kind of thinking out loud, I guess, but yeah.
Yeah, I think I can kind of respond to the beginning of your question and probably not some of the more challenging concepts at the end, but so you know, there's the IMLLC report and there are PPB directives. PCEP can absolutely comment on either both of those types of things and say, hey, we've reviewed these sorts of materials. We would like to recommend something slightly different based on, our own assessment, including community input that we've heard that relates to these subjects. So just, because these things that relate to the subject already exist does not preclude you from weighing in on them and suggesting changes. And I think as we identified at the beginning of the meeting, it might actually be a great time to think about this issue because it's early in the process and the formation of this team. So just wanted to add that. Carrie?
Thank you. Well, in addition to, I think it's great that everybody comes to the table now and these conversations happen. They're difficult conversations, and everyone showing up is a significant representation. So that's great. And I think maybe our recommendation, in addition to requests that we have about the team, how it's formed, how it's reviewed, whatever, would be about providing the public platform for community input. Possibly we can formalize, request a formal arrangement where, like the stops data, we could review the reports, and more immediate, because these things require, but the public wants to talk about things after they happen right away. Maybe we could formalize some sort of representation at our meetings when we do provide a public platform for discussion, about incidences or about how things went well, in addition to the updates that we'll be getting from the city and then promoting to the public.
Thanks, Carrie. Ashley?
Yeah, thanks, Tori. Just really quickly, Carrie, were you talking about like that reporting out as after the RRT is reestablished, implemented? Are you talking about like future?
I mean, in the process, I don't suggest that we have a formal schedule of we expect 5 announcements before this or anything like that, but leading up to it, obviously they're sharing information with everyone. We can promote it. And then basically, if we're making a recommendation about how the RRT operates in the future, having a liaison type partnership formalized so that we can have official representation at meetings when and if things happen. We know that we can count on somebody being, like a PCCEP conduit for being able to bring the conversation to the public. Yeah, much like our colleagues on the call tonight and every other call do, but in a way sort of formalizing it so that we just make sure that it always happens.
Okay, thanks. I just wanted to clarify that. And then I guess just chiming in about ideas for recommendation, I was just wanted to propose maybe a work group. I feel like this has been successful in the last couple of recommendations we've done, and one we're currently working on with the PCCEP codification. And work group would be around focusing on some of this research that sounds like we might need to do, so that I really appreciated Stephanie's suggestion to make sure that we're aligning with what could be actionable for within the recommendation for the city. So that just feels like it requires a little bit of background work that maybe a work group could help establish and just like get things going as we move into meeting spaces with more information. And then I think I had heard that there or I was also kind of reading too that there's going to be some opportunity, or that the city is going to make opportunities to get community engagement. And I was just wondering if PCCEP like could host a forum for that. And maybe this is just down the line a little bit more. I see this recommendation, like, and we've sort of mentioned this is the beginning of a long process. So I don't know if we even know what, I mean, Kip, I liked your suggestion too, but I think we still need a lot more time to listen and create forums for the city to sort of explain to the public like what's going on. And I think you've all mentioned that a little bit. So just like thinking of steps like in the next 6 months, what we can kind of accomplish to keep this moving, because even I'm not even saying in 6 months we would be ready for recommendation, but just sort of thinking of some strategy around getting us closer to one. So thinking of, yeah, just having the city co-host some forums, PCEP, about more information. And then my brain just blanked. Oh my gosh. it's been a long day. I feel like all our brains have gone.
It's one of those days. Yeah,
Ah,
I don't
know.
know. I'm with you. I don't
Really
know.
whatever.
Yeah. Let's go to Devonte.
Yeah, Ashley, I definitely concur with what your idea of a work group. I think that that's going to kind of be the best starting point for us to be able to create something that is actually able to be implemented and, as you guys said, actionable. Because if we are listening to the testimony, which I think is extremely important, we have to then find ways to make sure that that aligns with whatever our guidelines that we're working within stipulate. And so I think that that's probably the best starting point. So I don't realistically know what we would be able to recommend tonight. I don't think that there's anything, right? And so I think that this has definitely been informational. It's good information. I'm excited about some of the positive recommendations that we'll be able to be put forward after we do a little bit more digging and looking at the information. But I think that that's a good place, or at least that's where I'm going to start, is just diving into some of these reports. And I think that that's going to be the best bet at getting something that can really help the community here.
Yeah. I like that, Devonte. Leslie, did you have something? I saw your hand go up and down.
I did, but I don't have really a fully formed thought. It was just more like, I like Ashley's idea a lot about like trying to get more information, digest it, understand what a recommendation could really look like, because the directives exist, right? So there's also this issue of like, okay, what Dan put in the chat, the video evidence is there. These people had half a shield or like not even a shield. It was a cutout, very flimsy thing, but the report didn't say that. And the way that the officers were excusing their actions would make sense potentially, right, to a person if the video evidence wasn't there to dispute what they said. So it's this issue of like, okay, is it intentional? Is it not intentional, but like maybe, giving them the benefit of the doubt, they like perceived it that way? And if so, why? Like, I feel like there's so many issues that like I don't know that a recommendation, it like is barely scratching the surface of why these things are happening, right? Like we're also talking about like systemic institutions that hold a lot of power. And, so I don't know, that's more the thought that I'm like processing, is like, are recommendations really going to assist in something when directives already exist? And it just seems like it's, they're not like, yeah, that's basically it. It's just a rambly thought, but that's more of where I am.
Yeah, I think, to be fair, you could make that comment about a lot of issues. And I think maybe there's a sense of overwhelm that, thinking about this issue, kind of brainstorming around it for the first time, and feeling like it's a lot. I do want to say, for the benefit of new members and other folks new to our space, this is often kind of where we start off with these conversations. And then over time, the work of a community group working on policy issues is, a little messy and complicated and takes a long time. But, we get there. So this is a totally normal place to start. And yes, there's a ton of information that I think this group will need to engage with further to move on this. So Kip?
Yeah, I was just going to say real quick that I do believe a working group is a good idea for formal recommendations. As part of the Settlement and Policy Subcommittee work, I'd like to see this line of conversation continue. We also have the opportunity as PCEP members to discuss changes to directives, and we've had good conversations about the PPB being open to that. And some of the things that Jared brought up last week are also topics that I want to continue on. So I believe there's space to work in short order as well on things that we feel need to be addressed as we approach a political season that just saw a re-upping of protest-related weapons and ammunition as this team gets reformed. So I feel like there's also an expediency that we need to have some conversations and ask some questions about and see what we can do to better code direction or directives, whatever it might be, without a long formal recommendation as well. And I'll leave it like that.
And Sav?
Yeah, I think Kip, you brought up a really good point. A lot of the people have been bringing up really important things. I have just a couple more things to say before I go. I think that in terms of what we consider to be a long-term solution, the city needs to be at the center of this, right? Because clearly cops are not going to listen to anything that the students are saying, or anything that, small groups are saying. I think the pressure needs to come from the city. It needs to come from places like the mayor's office, places where, the cops can be held directly accountable. There also needs to be a lack of leniency for things like switching out badge numbers, which is something that we've seen. I know we have a couple cops in this chat. I know you guys know that those badge numbers are Velcro, and we've seen it happen. We've seen people switch those badge numbers. There needs to be less of a, oh, you did it once, that's okay. Oh, you did it twice, that's all right, no worries. There needs to be a bigger accountability culture. And when I say that, I understand that, we've been saying this for years and it hasn't happened, right? And I know that all of the officers who are here in this chat today have immediately turned off their video cameras when students started talking about this sort of thing, which is interesting because they can't even make eye contact with students on the ground when they're standing in front of them with riot batons. So it reveals a pattern of metaphorically and physically not being able to look the consequences of your actions in the eye. I think we need to rethink the way that we treat mental health evaluations with the Portland Police Precinct. I think we need to elevate the importance of psychological evaluations of these cops. That's an incredibly important piece that I think that has been overlooked severely in these past few years. Things like allowing Portland Police to keep 500 expired ammunitions cannot happen. I know Ted Wheeler just basically said, that's fine, no worries, you can hang on to those tear gas canisters. That kind of thing cannot happen. The lack of accountability is where the problem starts. And I guess I'm answering this question with a question. What steps need to be taken in order for accountability to actually be put into action? What's that missing piece? That's pretty much all I have to say. I do want to acknowledge before I go to one of the officers who private messaged me, please don't thank me for being here. We don't want to be here. We are asking for y'all not to beat us to the point of life-threatening injury with riot batons. None of us want to be doing that. So I understand that you think you're doing a good thing. But when you thank the students for coming to testify with this sort of thing, don't thank me for asking you to not threaten my life. It's not okay. It never will be. And I think that the notion of students having to even ask that question in the first place, that's a problem right there. The fact that we have to carry shields in the first place, the fact that students feel the need to take extensive measures to protect themselves, that is the problem in the first place. And it needs to start with, I don't know, why do the students feel the need to put on helmets before they go to protest? Why do students feel the need to carry around shields? It's not because students enjoy escalating. This isn't for fun. This isn't for giggles. This is because there is a real concern for bodily harm and threat to life. So where do we go from there? That's the question that I leave with.
Thank you, Sav. PCCEP, any final comments before we move to open public comment? With regards to the recommendation and kind of everything we've discussed today. Odelia?
Devontae, you can go ahead before me.
I just wanted to say something that really stood out to me that I've been thinking about constantly since our last meeting was something that was said, and it was that safety looks different to everyone. And I think that that's so true, and that really is what the root of this issue, or at least part of it, is what safety looks like to people who are protesting there, right? And then from the law enforcement perspective, what is safety to them? What do they consider to be unsafe? You know, to just random community members who live in the area who may or may not be impacted when the protests are happening, to other students that aren't a part of the protest and can no longer utilize the school library because of the damages that are done. So I think as the meeting ends, just kind of trying to possibly consider although tensions may be high, although there may be people who are at odds that are attending this meeting, that all of us are here because we desire for policing in the city of Portland to look different, for police to be a pillar of the community, entity that can be relied on by the community and not an entity to be feared. So to continue to kind of check our own biases and strive to, walk in tandem with one another to reach a positive resolution. That's all that I could possibly ask of everyone that attends. And I continue to strive for that myself. I have had both positive and negative experiences with law enforcement. As a Black male, I think that that's something that other people who may or may not look like me can probably also concur with or say that they have also experienced that too. So, we're all here trying to be on the same team, trying to reach a compromise and work to resolution. So please, I think everyone should keep that in mind and just remember, the list of I forget what the term was, but the rules for the meetings. One of them is to call out bias. Let's continue to check our own biases and try to channel our energy in as positively as possible. Although trauma is going to be trauma. There's only so much that you can do to perceive that in a positive way. But just to please remember that.
Thanks, Devontae. Odelia?
Yeah, thank you. I was just gonna wrap this conversation up, I guess, then we can move into open public comment. But yeah, I just wanted to say thank you again to everyone who has shared things they've seen or experienced, and things they want to see differently. And I think in an ideal world, everyone is safe and everyone has that safety that they imagine and want for themselves, right? And that's a very big question of how we get there. But going back to the idea of protest too, and people protest people protesting isn't like always necessarily a, I'm gonna stop actually before I get like really just too, yeah, I'm gonna stop. But to Kip's point about like the money being spent on crowd control, ammunition's $1.1 million, I believe, that in line with this new team happening. I think like those happening concurrently is also something that can be perceived to be a little scary of like, why is this much like ammunition and all of these devices being required right now for this time for these protests. But again, this is the start of a very big conversation, and hopefully we can continue to delve deeper and deeper. Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. The beginning of a really complicated issue, as many of you have named, but a really, I think, positive and healthy sort of brainstorming discussion to sort of get us started with this. And I also want to recognize Odelia and her leadership on this issue and the passion she's bringing to the subject as one of PCCEP's appointed youth members. I think this is an issue that pretty obviously has impacted some of the, youth, but young adults in the Portland community. And so I just wanted to kind of make sure we mention that tonight and appreciate Odelia for bringing this specific issue to the meeting as a co-chair, and also to some of our guests who spoke about their experiences on campus and as students. It's really great to have youth in our space and make sure that we're hearing about issues that impact you all. Okay, so I think now we're transitioning into open public comment. So this is a time for folks to comment on anything beyond the agenda of this meeting. So anything we haven't already kind of touched upon that's related to stuff that PCCEP works on, or if you have kind of a follow on from something that was already brought up, you're free to discuss that as well. So yeah, feel free to raise your hand at this time and we will hear from you. There's Dan. Go for it.
Hi, Dan Handelman again. I'm not touching my computer, so I won't crash out my Zoom again. With Portland Cop Watch, and I don't know if y'all saw what I put in the chat about. I do not agree that it's inappropriate for you to make any kind of recommendation that is not necessarily exactly what the DOJ agreement says. I know that the city tried to just explain they don't want you to make a recommendation that the city won't approve and then be disappointed. But I think the point is you're the community's voice, and if the agreement needs to be changed, the agreement needs to be changed. That leads me to a question about your agenda. It says there was going to be a check-in about your codification. I didn't hear if there was a brief report on that. I know you said there's a work group working on it. About the training money, the $1.1 million, I also put in the chat that, this is another frustration with the city. It was on the agenda, it said $1.1 million, and everybody thought that's how much equipment they're getting. But then when the presentation was made, it was explained that about $55,000 of that is for weapons, which is still a lot. But the rest of it is for training. So, I don't know why there's not more transparency from a city that values transparency as one of its core values. And then also last time, it was explained that the city has all along wanted to reconstitute the rapid response team under that name. Your slides call it the public order team. I said last time that we have documents, I think that the most recent version of the crowd control policy uses the term public order team. And I just kind of feel like sometimes they're trying to make us think that we don't know what we're talking about, even though we have documents proving that what they said isn't accurate. And I find that very frustrating as well. And finally, just a little administrative note for you all. The agendas for your meetings, and you can check this because they're all online, but your agendas for your meetings used to include the names of the committee members and the contact information, if you want to join on Zoom and so forth, it's much easier to have that all in one place than the guy searching around all over the internet to try to find where, how to get on the meeting, where's the agenda, who are the people who are involved. So if you can get that put back the way it used to be, that would be lovely. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dan. Ashley?
Yeah, I just thought I would chime in a little about updates to the codification. I know we didn't get a chance to get around to it, but if that's okay to talk about it right now. But yeah, I think update is, yep, we want to come back to full PCCEP meeting, which I believe last meeting we talked about July 10th. I was looking at the meeting schedule. It looks like our next full PCCEP meeting will be July 17th. So just probably have to plan for that. And then I had suggested in our work group that we try to have a quarterly meeting or more quarterly meeting with the mayor before that, so that we can get a little bit of buy-in and understanding of just like where they think the discussion, what we're having. And something else we talked about in our work group was just, going back to that idea of do we try to put who we respond to, who we advise, it still be just the mayor and the chief of police, or do we add council considering the changes? I don't think we landed anywhere around where we didn't really land on how to answer that. I think we've gotten some advice, and I think we've talked about in the last meeting about if we do go to council, then we're under public meeting laws, and a little less flexibility to have a work group to do some more research. So, I think most of us acknowledging new members might not understand the nuances there, but it's something we've talked about a lot over the last couple of years since I've been on PCCEP about just public, being constricted by public meeting laws. And so if we want to add that into the code, then that would change how we operate. Another thing we talked about is things that we can add to our process or the PCCEP plan, which, also has to get approved, but part of our process of how PCCEP comes to making a recommendation is adding going to council and presenting our recommendation to council. And so that was another suggestion I made for the work group for the PCCEP codification recommendation, that after we've submitted it and approved it, within those 60 days, we go to council to present it. And so we're socializing it with the council, who will have to vote on it as well. So I think that's most updates. I think that's my understanding. If anybody has any other things to chime in about.
Oh, Samir, go ahead.
You can go first.
Okay. We also discussed, to be transparent, we also discussed quorum. And just like kind of what that looks like and how it could actually be like an inhibitor if we lower quorum with the amount of people on PCCEP later, because of who has like the privilege and power and money to do this volunteer work, and to like later down the line who will get appointed to PCCEP and who will stay. So we talked about lots of different things like that. That was the only other thing I remember. Yeah.
Yeah, which I think we talked about in the context of not only this recommendation, but just future PCCEP operations. And I just wanted to note, this conversation's been kind of hard today. I've also had my own experience with PPB and protesting and being a passive protester and being brutalized. And I just wanted to note that it takes a lot for people to come into this space and tell those stories. That's why I'm active. That's why I want to be part of this conversation. I think what happened in 2020, it was a really dark time in our community with respect to like how we trust police. And I just I think the thought that's been in my brain tonight is if Portland is known for a protest city where we fight for rights, for accessibility and inclusivity, then why do the PPB have this sort of standard of operation of how they react to protesters, which is with brutal force, plain and simple. We see it and we have videos of it. So I just wanted to note that, just one my own public testimony. So thank you.
Thanks, Ashley. Any final comments? All right. Okay, I think we can move to wrap the meeting. And Ashley, I appreciate you for acknowledging that. Yes, definitely appreciative of everyone who comes to our space and shares such different perspectives and often very personal experiences and stories with us, and trusts this committee and everyone else here to hold space for that. So thank you to everybody who's here tonight for holding that space with us. And yeah, I think we can actually I'll hand it over to Odelia for any closing comments as co-chair, and then we will look at what's next.
Yeah, I think Ashley had a great closing comment, and I should just probably stop talking because I can't anymore. So yeah, to be continued.
Yeah, you did a great job, Odelia. Okay, so let's look at what's next. So there's no meeting next Wednesday. It is Juneteenth. So that is a state holiday, and the city will not be holding any meetings on that day. And then the following Wednesday is a big community engagement event for PCCEP. Would love to see all of you there. It is in person only at the Melody Event Center. That is the Brain Injury Policing and Public Safety Forum. And that was planned by PCCEP members who have experience of living with a brain injury and a lot of really interesting experiences and thoughts about how that intersects with policing and public safety. And there will be some interactive components to that event. About half of it will be devoted to kind of community discussion and sort of brainstorming around some of those topics. So it'd really be great to see all of you there. Okay, and that's a wrap for us. So with that, thank you again to all of our PCCEP members, members of the public, and our accessibility support tonight. And it is 8 p.m. and this meeting is adjourned.
Thank you, everybody.
Recording stopped.
Thanks, Adelia.
Yeah. Great
Thanks,
job, Adelia,
folks.
everybody.
Great meeting. Talk to you all soon.